Fellow academics, interested amateurs, I know you expected to read a purely academic piece on my time among humans, but I must ask for you to believe me when I say that this is utterly impossible. It is impossible because they are no mere chemical in a test tube to be catalogued down to the fine points and filed away, no mere equation to be written and noted for later study. In traveling with them, living with them, I found parts of myself that I never knew existed. I perhaps alarmed you when I called them infectious before, but if you could imagine for a moment a communicable cure that traveled faster than disease, that is what I experienced. I wondered sometimes if their shortened lifespans were part of why they seemed so full of energy. They have a saying that a candle which burns twice as bright burns half as long, and if this was true, then it was why their race lived so short compared to so many of us. If I could experience as much as they did, I would trade lifespans with them in a heartbeat. Of course, as you are reading this, you must surely know we survived the brief encounter with the pirates, but before you proceed on with this accounting, I want to make sure you note something. Our ship was not completely unarmed. We could have fought beside the human vessel, but our captain chose to abandon our rescuers. It was an eminently practical thing to do, and I had it checked into when it was possible. He was not reprimanded for it in any way, nor did I ever find criticism of him for it. Even me, at that moment as we fled deeper into human space, didn't think about what he was doing, and nor did it occur to me to criticize him for it. I'm sure you are in agreement. But then, compare the human ship captain's actions to our own. The human willingness to fight and die was far in excess of their own survival instinct. They sought the fight and rushed to it, while we ran away. Which course creates an empire? Who do you want protecting your ship when you travel? You may think the humans are mad, but their madness, if that is what it is not without purpose or value of its own. Now on with the accounting. As the days slipped past, our professor began to relay more stories to us of his time on Earth, of human customs, birthdays, drinking songs, sports, child-rearing. It seems he became like a grandfather to a pair of human children, watching them grow up and have children of their own just before he had to leave the planet when his allotted time was up. In all his stories, my teacher never once sent his tongue near his eyeballs. It was more like he wasn't talking to us at all, really. More to himself, he knew the name of every member of the family and those of their neighbors, and the days that they died. Reader, I'm sure I don't need to tell you how rare this is for anyone at all. And yet he did it for the members of another species? The more I learned, the more interested I became, and day slipped into day with more history, more culture lessons, and more on human mental processes. I learned about bashfulness. See, some humans, strangely enough, find nudity to be troubling, even shameful. They come from a death world. The act of breathing corrodes their lungs over a lifetime. The place is riddled with natural disasters, and their own sun is lethal to them. As such, they create clothing to cover and protect their bodies. They get so used to it that being without it is strange. So the end result is a species that is shy about their bare flesh, but can endure almost anything. But it was because of that shyness that my professor held out to us each a set of clothing. My own was a pair of brown pants and a simple button-down shirt. No shoes were needed, at least, and the material was very thin, almost pointless, really. But when I just stared at it, he licked his eyeballs and stared right at me. When on Earth, do as the Earthians do. You are there to immerse yourself in their ways to better understand them. That means wearing their clothing. Going around naked might be fine on Dlamisa, but not on Earth. I reached out and somewhat reluctantly closed my fingers around the offered set, as did my equally reluctant classmates 2 by 2, and tried it on. At least it breathed, but when I saw myself in the mirror, I could only think, you look ridiculous. The human body is strange. They have enough muscle to pull 17 tons, but only if all muscles pull in the same direction. However, they can't do that. Their limbs seem fragile and easily injured thanks to a lack of natural armor, but they produce a chemical in their brains that puts them into a frenzy of bloodlust that will ignore pain until they are bled dry. Essentially, they can fight until they run out of murder fuel in their veins if they are triggered in just the wrong way. There are stories of past humans called berserkers who, on losing an arm, would pick it up and swing their severed arm like a club, beating others to death with it. A feat we now know is perfectly within the realm of possibility, thanks to their brief war with the Zenti. They may sound in this sort of depiction like monsters, which, admittedly, explains their media of horror entertainment. Recall what I said about anything less than impossible being seen as ordinary and nothing special, but it wasn't this that my professor was so drawn to, not based on his stories. So I focused on that, and all that he had to say, until we saw a tiny mote of dust caught in a sunbeam, and that mote of dust became a little blue marble, a nothing special world in a universe full of trillions of galaxies, of billions of solar systems, and endless planets within the whole. But this was going to be our home. I note at this moment that, when I was drawing close to the planet Earth, I didn't miss my own home even a little. But out of the corner of my eyes, I watched my normally reserved professor press his hand to the glass as if he were trying to just get one bit closer to that world, one fraction of a second faster. It didn't look like much, not to my eyes. But still, it was something. I could see the doubt in my comrades still. They barely looked at all. But I felt the excitement of the new experience ahead at least. The world ahead grew larger and larger, and the voice came over the telecom. "Brace yourselves for entry, docking in one span." We raced to our security harnesses, strapped ourselves in, and waited for the rattling to stop. As our ship came down and the bright yellow sun became a dot instead of a looming monster, I noticed how very green so much seemed to be. It was a strange shift from the black and blue plants I was used to, but it was the least of the surprises I would face, and those would begin from the moment we exited our ship. You will forgive me, I hope, for the omissions that follow in this narrative. I was not with my fellow students for long after this, and I remember nothing about their reactions because I was so caught up in my own. It was a strange, strange thing. But also it was somehow wonderful too. Before I explain what it was, you should first know about the law of slow-moving disasters. This law, first given a name by humans themselves even though most races in the galaxy follow it, states that if an intelligent race has the tools, the time, and sees a disaster coming, that they will generally act to avert the crisis. This is not always true, but it is generally true, and in the distant past, humans lived through multiple proofs of it. They nearly destroyed their ability to inhabit their own world, but, able to see the problem far ahead, they acted to fix it. They began planting trees amidst the concrete and redesigning buildings as green homes. Not in the energy sense that has become popular in the harvesting of energy from the stars, but in the literal sense. Homes were designed for the growth of plant life that would act as a carbon sink. Water that was once wasted and lost from the rain was harvested from almost every building either to provide for the plants, which by evolutionary quirk had similar requirements to those I knew from my own world, or it was filtered, recovered, and used to provide for the population. They began to build taller buildings and opened up more space for parks and began to slash hostile emissions little by little. And by this and other methods better discussed in planetary modification texts, they preserved their ability to live on their world. Perhaps this sounds like sentiment, but I don't tell it to you for that reason. I tell it to you so that you understand the story behind what I saw soon after leaving my ship. "Grandfather!" It was the first word I heard when we stepped off, and my professor, who I never saw move faster than a shuffle, pushed us aside and rushed to a group of waiting humans as if he were dying of hunger and found a feast laid out in front of him. This group of humans was mostly stooped, hunched forward, and either bald-headed or with wisps of that funny fur on top that most of them seemed to have. They had arms open wide, and my professor, a man who never raised his voice for anything, shouted a word I didn't know. "Jonathan!" His tongue lolled out as he rushed from behind us, and he embraced the one to speak. "Nadia! And these would be..." It was then that I learned that human greetings with loved ones are frequently by name, a very informal sort of way, and it seems Jonathan was the old human's name, and Nadia was his wife. This shook me to the core to see squamatomorph species are not prone to physical contact, so to see it so blatant and eagerly sought out was shocking to say the last. The babble of words my professor uttered was almost all lost on me. The humans were flanked by younger people, tall and strapping, or oddly shaped with multiple curves. They made me think right away of Lisa, and I looked down at the wrist that was touched by the first human I ever met. They in turn had smaller humans with them, ranging down to ones that would not even come up to the bend in my knee. I was lost in thought for a moment, and didn't really know even what I was thinking, but my attention was taken away from this nascent introspection when I realized I was being pointed at. "Doggy! I want Doggy! Let pet Doggy!" I lifted my eyes to find the voice, and saw a tiny human pointing his hand at me and wiggling on the hip of the woman who held it. This was the moment I realized how much my species looked like a two-legged version of their favorite pet. I'd seen it in movies and pictures, but never made the connection to myself, nor imagined I could be mistaken for something like that. I admit I wasn't quite sure what to think. My professor's excited chattering was something to behold, and the many other humans who passed the long open corridor of the transit site were watching with cocked heads and craned necks before they disappeared out of view, going about whatever business they had. But when the little human's high-pitched whine threatened to overtake the conversation, finally paused. "He wants to pet you," my professor explained. "It's a thing human children do with furry animals." "Ah, is it?" I admit I was a little reluctant, but when my professor gave me the nod, I approached, and the human woman said, "My apologies, he always does this." She was a little red in the face, a sign of embarrassment over their offspring. See figures 2-5 and 2-6 in the back of this book for reference. I still might have held back, but my curiosity got the better of me, and I bent my head forward so that the woman could hold the child up. He had a mouth full of pearl-white teeth that looked utterly non-predatory, and a giant smile that took up a good portion of his pudgy, soft pink face. And still wiggling in his mother's arms, his little hand came down between my ears and rubbed. It would be years before I learned why my right foot began to thump on the floor where I stood, but at least when my tail wished wildly back and forth, I could identify the cause. It felt fantastic. His little hand was so warm, and the fearless way he looked into my eyes, with such utter openness and completely unguarded, was something I don't think I will ever find away from human populations. "He likes you," the woman said as she lowered the young male away, despite the pout that his face took on. "I see. Is it customary to offer to pat their head in return?" I asked, and with that broad smile on her face that looked very much like her son's, she replied to me, "Be my guest." I put my hand out and draped it over the little human's head and rubbed the same way he rubbed mine, and he let out a noise of laughter. It was the first time I heard a human child laugh in person, and if I could pick any word for it, I would call it relaxing. This was my host family, if that wasn't obvious, my professor said, and set himself in the middle of the miniature human community. But Jonathan and Nadia were much smaller and younger then. I've kept in touch with them over these many years, and watched their family grow. The others I knew when I was younger. They've passed away, but I know all of these, he gestured to the left and right of them, by name, and have watched them come together and grow like Laxinian weeds since I returned to university. I thank you, my students, for providing me the opportunity to come back here again, even if that wasn't your intent. I barely heard a word. I was still focused on patting the tiny human's head, and the way his little fingers closed themselves over top of my hand to keep it going even if I wanted to withdraw. "Head pats are happiness," the woman said with a laugh. I got the feeling she was telling a joke, but I didn't quite get it, and then she gave me her name. "I'm Rebecca, by the way, Rebecca Walker." "My name isn't pronounceable to you," I explained to her, "so pick something that will be easy to say." "Bailey?" Two humans said at once, and Bailey I was. I have no idea how they came up with that, and when I asked, they moved their shoulders up and down and said with such perfect synchronicity that I wondered if humans had a hive mind we hadn't discovered yet. "You just look like a Bailey." It did have a nice sound to it, so I nodded my head and said, "That will be fine." My further reflection was cut short when my professor said, "As you know, human miniature communities are centered around family units, and this family is made up of multiple branches, each of which lives in a city called Louisville, named after one of their ancient monarchs from another continent. If you'll check your data pads, you will see which branch is yours, and you will from here on out go your separate ways with them, making regular reports to me of what you learn, and otherwise, explore the strangest land you will ever see." I got the feeling my old professor had a deeper meaning to what he said, but he gave us no time to discuss it or ask questions. He was already walking away after a quick embrace with the others, including Rebecca, and leaving with the aged Jonathan and Nadia. I yanked my data pad out of the pouch I wore at my side and saw the name Rebecca and William Walker. The humans were doing the same, and her husband held out his hand. "It looks like you're with us," he said, and with his other hand, showed me the picture of myself along with relevant information about me such as dietary needs and the like. "Welcome to the Walker family, Bailey." I stuck out my arm and let him shake it, a strange sort of gesture, but one I knew to be a greeting. And just like that, I was adopted.